Hey, it's Jess, and welcome to The Heart Strong, a podcast where we explore navigating the challenges in our lives. It's my personal mission to guide you towards your greatest potential. So come along with me as we explore living with courage, or as I put it, living heart strong. Welcome to the Heart Strong podcast. Earlier this season, I had the opportunity to interview a young man named Kelley Scoble. That was episode 43. Ryan is an NCAA lacrosse player who found out that he needed a heart transplant after being diagnosed with cardiomyopathy. And after he received his new heart, he made it back to the lacrosse field in record time, which is what made people like the Wall Street Journal and the Today Show interested in his story. And so not only did Ryan need a heart transplant, but his father did as well. And so it's quite a story. But here's what I know. Behind every person who goes through a challenge, who goes through something that is sort of life-altering, there are someone behind them walking them through it. There's someone in their corner that's sort of helping them to get through it. And so today I have the pleasure of talking to Kelley Scoble, who is Ryan's mom. And I want to shed some light on the heroes behind the scene. We often look at the people that go through the situation, but we all know there's people behind the scene. And so I asked her to come on the show because I wanted to talk to her about what it was like to watch her son and her husband go through a heart transplant, but also to talk about her and what she learned about herself in the process. So Kelley, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks. It's nice to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited that you're here. So let's just dive in. But I thought it would be good to start out with a little bit of your story in case people didn't listen. By the way, it's episode 43 if you want to go back and listen to Ryan's episode. But tell us about how you learned that both Ryan and your husband, Steve, needed a heart transplant and just a little bit about what was happening in your family at that time.
Sure. It was unexpected in both cases and on a kind of the same but separate timelines. So it started in November of 2020, where my husband was feeling ill. He had some congestion and thought he had a cold, maybe pneumonia. It was pretty severe, but at the time it was COVID. So his doctor's appointments were video appointments and things like that. We eventually, it progressed to a point that we got him into an emergency room to be seen. And he was diagnosed with end stage heart failure after they took a look at him and things like that. And a lot of the symptoms are the same as far as the congestion and things like that, that it looks like a cold. It does not look like anything related to the heart. That emergency room admittance ended up to be a several month process where his health declined rapidly. He was in the hospital diagnosed with COVID. He had declined to a point where he was put on ECMO, which is a life support system where he was taken off of lung and heart support to give his body a rest. And he was treated with an LVAD, which is a left ventricular assist device. It's basically a heart pump that is put into his body with external batteries. So he awoke from essentially being on an ECMO to having an LVAD. He was incapacitated at the time, so all those decisions were made by me with his care team and things like that, unbeknownst to him. So he awoke with an LVAD, and we began that long recovery process. So fast forward, and it was not fast at the time, by the way, but fast forward to January of 2021, he was finally released from the hospital just in time to spend a couple of days with both of my children, who are both college age. Ryan is my oldest, but I also have a daughter, Devin, who was returning to her sophomore year of college. Spent a couple of days with them. We celebrated all the holidays that he had missed, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, all in that week's period of time. And then the kids went back to school and we began our recovery process and kind of adjusting to our new normal with him and the LVAD device. And we were continuing on that journey and making progress. He was getting stronger, very weakened from, by the way, being bedridden for that amount of time. Like needed
Yeah.
assistance to get up the stairs. We needed a belt to get him up out of chairs. It was a long recovery. We were finally seeing him strengthen and seeing that progress continue. And then in March, it was probably around the mid of March, it was right after Ryan's 21st birthday, we received the very unexpected call that he had been feeling sick at school. He had told me about some of his symptoms, but I never, even after being through all of that with my husband, never connected it to heart failure. He
Mm.
is a college athlete. I just
Mm.
did not imagine that that could happen. So mid March was when he had his incident on the field that you covered with him in his
Mhm.
discussion, and he was also unexpectedly diagnosed with late stage heart failure. So I immediately mobilized my team of supporters in
Mhm.
Cincinnati to pick up on helping with Steve's care, and got in a car and drove up to Erie, Pennsylvania, where Ryan was, and we began his journey at that time. And he was able to return home briefly, even with the diagnosis. We could not get him an immediate transfer into some place like the Cleveland Clinic. It just wasn't possible at that time. So I wanted to get him home to see Steve's care team. It was fortuitous that I had already had a really strong education on heart failure and what that diagnosis means, and what are the treatment options, and what it looks like and feels like, and the importance of getting a good care team around you. So I returned Ryan to Cincinnati, where he began being seen by Steve's care team. And they very quickly came to the conclusion that Ryan would need a heart transplant, that his heart was actually even more enlarged than Steve's. It was a different, same diagnosis, but different journey. And
Mhm.
they were keen to get him transferred to a facility that had transplants available. At the time, that hospital did not. They do now, which is great. But at
Mhm.
the time, a local option was not available. So we got the transfer to Cleveland Clinic and began our journey there with Ryan's transplant, while Steve recovered at home with his LVAD. Um, Ryan received his transplant the day after Mother's Day in May of 2021. We had his recovery process there in Cleveland, returned back home eventually in June of 2021, and resumed our new normal now with Ryan newly transplanted and Steve still gaining strength from his LVAD. Steve was motivated by Ryan's transplant process. He knew at the time that an LVAD is a bridge to a transplant. So he was really motivated to strengthen himself more aggressively to get ready for a transplant, which was all great. But we weren't expecting Steve's transplant for a while. Both of the guys in my family are tall. Steve has a hard blood type, so we were expecting a wait for
Mhm.
Steve's heart. And additionally, he was doing well with the LVAD, so he wasn't really in a crisis mode. But despite our thoughts that that might come later rather than sooner, in September of 2021, Steve got the call that his heart was available. And we then left Ryan in his recovery. Again, I called my support network. I'm leaving my newly transplanted son at home alone, so I can go get my husband transplanted. And then we went in the opposite direction of Cleveland to Nashville, to Vanderbilt, where he received his transplant, and stayed there for a couple months through his recovery in Nashville. So I lived in Cleveland, Nashville, and Cincinnati that year. I think I spent a total of 5 months living at home. The rest of the time was separated between those two cities and those two transplants.
Yeah. So during this process, like I know you're probably, I'm imagining just from my own experience, you're someone in survival mode. You're just like, we're just going to do this and get through it.
Yes.
But in those quiet moments, maybe when you were driving to Cleveland or what was going through your head? Like, what were you thinking about? I don't know. Were you thinking about the future? Were you thinking about the present? Like, what was going on inside of you?
It's hard not to think about the future, but what
Yeah.
I had learned, and it was really, really critical to my journey with Ryan, because I have to say, for anyone who's gone through it, going through it with a spouse is really difficult. I mean, he's my best
Mhm.
friend and the love of my life, and that is hard. But when it's your child,
Mhm.
take that and multiply it,
Yeah.
by a huge multiplier. And so fortunately, and the timing of it all was incredible, but also an incredible blessing. Not only
Yeah.
did I understand more about heart failure and all of the things that I learned about the physiology of it and things like that, but I had also learned really acutely with Steve not to think too far into the future. So with anything, and I imagine it's the same with any health journey, whether it's a cancer diagnosis or heart failure or anything else, there's a journey. You're on a road, there's a journey that you're following. And you're getting information kind of one or two steps at a time. The medical community knows, like, they're thinking of the long term, but they're planning for the next couple of steps in that journey. And
Yeah.
they know, and what I had to learn the hard way was they know that at any of those steps, something can be introduced, some variable can be introduced, some reaction can happen that's unexpected. Any number of things can happen that throw you off of that path. And what I had learned through Steve and did not repeat with Ryan is that I was looking literally one step ahead. Because when Steve was going through his journey, it was like, his heart was at a rate. We knew that he needed some assistance for his heart and things like that. And so you were kind of looking forward to, all right, well, they'll get him stabilized and then they'll look at this LVAD option as well as others. We'll see if medication helps it. Like, there was all of this, and instantly in that case, my mind was going to, okay, we'll get this fixed. And then
Mm.
hopefully he'll be home by Thanksgiving. Like, that was where my
Yeah.
mind went, because he was, it was a great care team. We were hearing all of these options and things like that. And then he got COVID and he tanked. And suddenly he's on
Mm.
life support. And suddenly all those plans are washed, and you've got a new reality in front of you. And that only has to happen a couple of times before you realize how much energy that takes and how hurtful and demoralizing it can be.
Yeah.
That suddenly I got it. Like, I've just got to look at what is our next benchmark? What's the next
Mhm.
thing that we need to happen? What's the next step on this journey? And I'm going to be completely focused on that. So by
Mhm.
the time I got to Ryan's situation, even with all of the additional emotion that was happening there, I knew, while I was driving to Cleveland, my next thought was arriving. What time will I arrive in Cleveland? How will I find out where to meet the ambulance that Ryan's riding in
Mhm.
and get to him? Um, what do I was thinking no further than that, because I knew that to do otherwise would be to it would expend my energy in a way that was not productive.
Right. And in a way that you can't
Can't
control,
control exactly,
you can't
precisely.
control it. I was just a couple weeks ago I recorded a podcast with a cardiac ICU nurse that I've known for a long time, and she's taking care of kids with congenital heart disease and had her own cancer journey and just
Hmm.
had gone through a lot of things. But what we kind of came to, we talked about hope, but like hope happens in the present moment.
Yes.
That it's like it's like, the age old things that we're supposed to learn is to, just live in the present, which is
Yes.
really hard to do. But just your story just sort of made me think of that as like sometimes the challenges in our life teach us the gift of the present moment. It's just right now. Like, we
Yes.
don't have control over the future. We're not living in the past. Like, we're right here, right now. And, that's like a a hard lesson to learn in general for humans, I
Mm-hmm.
think. But one of the gifts that comes from going through really hard things.
100% yes. Of course, you always have that aspiration of the happy ending and the,
Mm-hmm.
this is all going to be okay and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it, that puts you directionally in a path, but
Mm-hmm.
the steps from there, it's, like you said, control what you can control. And sometimes like there were moments in this journey where the things I could control were very, very little, very little. And that makes that level of mindfulness, like, it might be, you know, uh, where am I going to sit in the hospital room
Right.
is your choice,
Yeah.
like, is what you can control, or like, being,
Yeah.
telling yourself to be mindful of what's still wonderful in the worst of circumstances. Like you've got to get really, really intentional and focused on sometimes very,
Mm-hmm.
very small
Mm-hmm.
successes.
Yeah, that's so true. Did you have like a mother's intuition about Ryan's journey or even your husband's? Like, did you have any sense of things? Like, did that help you make decisions? Or, sometimes we just get those like little knowings as mothers, especially. Did you sense anything like that through your journey?
I think, I mean, for both, it was very different. And I think that that's the, the other gift of this is I had this, in the midst of all of it, this incredible time and focus to think of each of them as individuals. And in my husband's case, it was thinking about, I actually had to speak to a panel of doctors who, panels of doctors decide on things like LVADs and
Yes, they
heart
do.
transplants. You have a panel of people who decide whether or not the patient is someone who gets that treatment because they're
Right.
expensive and they have a lot of factors that go into their success. And at the time my husband was incapacitated and I had to defend to a panel that he had more life to live, that he would want this, that despite the inconveniences and the adjustment of this very radical treatment, that he would want it. And so I found myself having to voice for him his will to live and what he had to live for.
Right.
And that was really life altering for me, because I had to think about it not from my perspective. Like, of course, I still want a husband, my kids still want a father, but what does he want? What does he have to live for? And put that into words, to a panel that's going to decide his fate. And at that point, that was really, it wasn't so much intuition as it was insight that has strengthened an already strong marriage going
Mhm.
forward and really
Mhm.
put me into a perspective to continue to support him in his
Mhm.
journey. Um, for Ryan, the time that this happened, this happened for him at a time where he was coming into his own as a young adult and pulling away from my influence, and wanting to be independently himself. Um, and so it was difficult. I had to almost pull back a little bit from some of what my intuition was. I wanted to hang on. I wanted to just wrap him up and
Mhm.
carry him through this journey. And that wasn't my role anymore. He was 21 years old and everything about his life and our relationship, he was telling me explicitly and implicitly that he was ready to be his own man, his own
Mhm.
adult. And
Yeah.
so my instinct to just want to wrap him up and carry him had to be translated into, I'm here to support. My arms are still here. will still lift him up if he needs it. But it was almost like, um, sometimes when someone is walking in front of you, you're just standing behind with your hands there, ready to catch them if they need you to, but never really needing to. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
And it was,
Yeah,
so I had to sort of rein that in. And I had my moments, I had my
of course.
mom moments where I was probably, getting getting more motherly
Hmm.
in a protective kind of, let me do this for you way than he needed. But he was, our time together was really beneficial and unusual. Like,
Hmm.
we joked that, there aren't a lot of mothers who spend, have the opportunity to spend, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week with their 21-year-old son in a room where it's
Yeah.
just the two of you. So
Yep.
but some of the advantages of that time and that conversation was that he could be really clear, and I'm really proud, like, and this has nothing to do with his heart condition, but he he's learned in his life to be able to express what he needs and to articulate
Mm.
his emotions, and he was really good about letting me know the things that were his part to own and what he needed from me. And I followed
Mm.
that advice. And it was different for both of them, but
Mm.
there was something beautiful about both of the way that both of them handled it as well.
Yeah. I think that's really neat what you said about, spending all that time with your son. And I've heard other parents, and, I spent a lot of time in the hospital with my son. Like, it
Hmm.
is, on one hand, it's absolutely terrible.
Hmm.
And on the other hand, it's a real gift to be able to sit with somebody and have this real quality time.
Yes.
It's like, and as our kids get older, they do want to do their own thing, and they think they know everything.
Yes.
My 14-year-old does, it's like,
Yeah.
and so, but there it is. So it's back to that present moment thing you said before. It's like getting the gift out of the moment, which was just sitting with your son and having that time with him, which I think is really incredible. And, you know, and then also allowing him to kind of be himself, which I think is really, because it is, I mean, there are so many parts of that journey and every stage, and there's so many choices to be made. And I also think I noticed that about Ryan too. He knows what he thinks, and he has like a sense of himself.
Hmm.
And I just, if I could ask you about that for a second, it's further down in my questions, but as a mother, like, I know from everything that I've been through, and my husband and I have worked through, it's like you have to be in touch with yourself when you go through these things. You have to get to know yourself. You have to, and I have, my 14-year-old and my 11-year-old. I want to instill that in them as young men, because I think in our culture we need men who know how they feel and are willing to
Yes.
talk about it. And so, I guess, what are your thoughts on that? Or is there any advice you have for mothers about, how to instill that in our kids so that when they do face something hard, that they sort of have those tools to be able to work through it?
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything magical. I do have a philosophy, and I think that my husband and I share it. I think it's been something that's come through in that, you know, we believe that, like, as individuals, like, we believe it for
Mhm.
each other, like, we're responsible for ourselves and our own happiness and our own journey. And it's not for anyone else to make you happy. So when I went into the relationship with my husband and into our marriage, we didn't come into that marriage thinking we need the other one for a happy,
Mhm.
fulfilled life. We came in as fulfilled, or in the journey of trying to be fulfilled, individuals who made each other better. And I hope that what we communicated to our kids, what I communicate to both of them, is that you don't need somebody that you're dating, or a boss to validate you, or a coach to validate you. You just need to understand that it's your responsibility to find what gives you joy, what makes
Mm.
you feel accomplished, what motivates you, and pursue that. And be, take advice and take input and accept all of that, and find somebody that you love that makes you better, but don't need it. Like, still take that on to yourself. If you're having a bad day, take responsibility to make that day better. However you need to do it. And be mindful along the journey. Like, one of and when I hear my adult kids repeat it, it gives me such joy, is that when they were growing up, like, I saw a quote somewhere that was, that in the morning when you wake up, instead of saying, oh, I'm tired, or, oh, I should, oh, I got so much to do today, this day's gonna suck, that you wake up and say, something wonderful is going to happen today. And it's just a way of just waking up and training your mind to look for what's good and wonderful. And when my kids had particularly bad, like it's finals week, or they had something really stressful or whatever, they would leave the house, like literally leave the house to get into their car or get on the bus, and they'd say, something wonderful is going to happen today. No, like how it, but the way, it was the words that were important. And even through all of this, like sitting in a hospital room, like, I know there were days where Ryan was like, something wonderful is going to happen today. Like, I can't just live with no hope that, and sometimes that wonderful thing was so small, that unless you were looking for it, you wouldn't even notice it. But it could have been the kindness of a nurse. It could have been, there were days where he had a great conversation with the woman who, like, cleans the hospital rooms, would have this really just joyful conversation with him, and that would be his thing. And both of my kids, I think, look for that, look for the wonderful, and they look for ways to just take control of their own destinies in whatever way they can.
Wow, that's amazing advice. That self-ownership. I think that's amazing. And I want to, so it's so cool that you said that, because last season I interviewed a Major League Baseball pitcher. And one of the things that he said is that his mom always said to him, you can do anything you want to do. Like when he was little, and she would say it to him over and over again, and then he would repeat it. And he said a lot of times he wasn't the fastest or the best, but he had this drive inside of him that he believed that he could do anything that he wanted to do. And so he talked about how that helped him out basically, pitch other people essentially into his role. And I have a son who's had a lot of challenges in school and some other things. And I always tell him every day hard work pays off. And so, when he doesn't want to go to his tutoring or he doesn't want to do stuff, I'm like, hard work, he's like, pays off.
Yeah.
So I just think that this is such a cool, as a mother, for all the moms listening, it's like really how important it is, like the words we breathe into our kids.
Yes.
And how just repeating ourselves even when they don't want to hear it, and how much that impacts them. And I'm going to steal that one about something wonderful is going to happen today, because I love that. And it's just, again, it's a simple things, but it's like this really beautiful gift we can give our kids as mothers, of believing, breathing life and agency into them, that really helps them to kind of weather their life. I love that, Kelley.
Yes, thank you.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's not mine. I wish I could attribute the quote to someone else.
Doing.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very cool. So I want to ask you about the sentiment that we hear often, is that people say, oh my gosh, I have no idea how you're doing that. How could you make it through that? And I've heard that many times in my life, and I have my own answer now that I give people. But how does that sentiment sit with you, and how do you see that, or how did you feel when people would say that to you?
It's unsettling to me. Like, number one, I like a lot of people, I don't probably accept compliments as graciously as I should. I accept them with, a little bit of embarrassment. But in addition to that, I also was struck by, people, especially the sentiment, I could never do what you did. Oh, if it was me, I could have never done it. And it it never sits with me because there was absolutely no moment in time when I did something that was uh, something that ever no one else could do. Everybody that I know, every person that is in my life could absolutely walk through this same journey because number one, you have to. Number one, like
Yep.
you're sitting in a chair where, you know, your choice is you wake up in the morning or you don't, and you wake up to the situation that you're faced with. But everything was just, it was just, there was no monumental task or any huge thing that I did. It was just, I just kept walking forward. I kept taking the next step. Um, and that's what anyone would do in this situation. Like it's, and so I think that everyone is capable of it. I'm glad that everyone doesn't have to. Like not everybody has
Yeah.
to go through this dramatic set of circumstances, but everybody is capable of it, and it's all relative. Like, it's the same thing that you do every single day. You just do it
Mm.
under a dramatic set of circumstances.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that everyone is capable.
Mm.
Everybody has that within them. Um, and sometimes the dramatic set of circumstances just gives you a perspective that you can then take forward to everything else, in a way that actually blesses your life, as much as it stresses it.
That's so true. So what perspective have you gained? Like what's the perspective that you carry into your life now that's maybe different than you had before?
I think it's the mindfulness, of seeing the joy and the value in the now and the today, uh, instead of planning for things to calm down or for
Mhm.
this next big thing to happen so then I can, focus on, whatever it is. I think that before all this happened, I spent a lot of time thinking, I'd be busy at work or busy with kid stuff at school or whatever, and I think, well, I will take care of myself, or I'll relax, or I'll have fun after I get through this next thing, and then that will be my reward for this work.
Mm.
And now I don't delay that. I think, every day is its reward. Every day there's something around you that is something to celebrate or something to feel good about, or there's time to take care of yourself and do it now. Like, don't wait until things calm down or things slow down or whatever, because they'll always be something else that comes in. And so, being more intentional about those priorities and just being more present. Again, it's not a magical thought that no one's ever thought of before, but it forces you into that perspective in a very explicit way that I can then carry forward to
Mhm.
everything that I do.
Well, it's not something that's like necessarily like an earth-shattering idea, but as humans, that's like some of the hardest things for us to do,
Exactly.
right? And so it sounds easy, but the practice is hard, and so that's why it's a practice because we
Right.
have to try it out and keep trying
Absolutely.
it out, right?
Yes, for sure. For sure. You
Yeah.
like, yeah, even after all of it, everything that my family went through, like there were times where we were like in the hospital room and I was sitting there looking at Ryan and I was thinking, I can't even imagine what is in the world will ever, like, I thought to times where I was annoyed that he didn't clean his room, or I
Mhm.
was frustrated with and I was like, I don't think I'll ever be able to like say no to him ever again. I don't think I'll ever be frustrated with him again. And, you come home and like, 10 minutes after he's home and he's kicked his gigantic size 14 shoes off and I trip over them in the kitchen, like I'm annoyed again. And there's,
Yeah.
but there's beauty in that annoyance. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
there's just kind of like, okay, like instead of being just annoyed by the shoes, let's be annoyed by the shoes, but also feel the blessing that my adult son is under my roof spending time here, and that energy and that life is in the house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. It's like realizing the blessings in the mundane
That's right.
things. Yeah, that it's just there.
Absolutely.
And that's really beautiful. So you went through this process and like you were working the entire time, I take it,
Hmm.
and I'm assuming because families have to eat and pay mortgages
Yes.
and have insurance and all the things that that is still continues on while this is happening. And I'm wondering, there's two parts to this question. One, I'd love to know about, your support system because you mentioned it a couple of times. And then I'm wondering, when we go through these circumstances, like we see life in a different way, which we've talked about.
Hmm.
And but I always say you peel behind a curtain that you never knew existed. Like you didn't
Right.
know what it was like to have people have heart transplants,
Right.
but now you're in a world of people that do. And so, like, what, I guess, recommendations or tangible experience that you have, like, this is something we should think about, maybe do a little bit differently whether it comes to patient care or health care or, supporting people who are
Hmm.
working while their people are sick. Like, so I don't know if you can share like maybe some ahas that you have, like, if I could change something,
Yes.
if I had a magic wand, like these are the things people should pay attention to.
Yeah, I think that for me it came down to self-care. So what I would say
Mm.
to anyone, and what I do say to anybody who's in any kind of caregiving situation, whether it's just day-to-day parenting or you're taking care of an elderly parent or you're taking care of somebody who's ill, is don't neglect taking care of yourself. And that's going to require being intentional about it and making it a priority. Um, and that priority is not going to come naturally. It's not going to come without, like, you're going to have to fight through some guilty feelings sometimes and things like that. But you, you can't help the people that you need to help if you're depleted. And there are a lot of parts of the process that are depleting for the caregiver.
Yeah.
And so, everything that I learned kind of almost a lot of it falls under that bucket of self care. Like the mindfulness was self care. The kind of, setting boundaries to the people that want to be involved in the process. So we had this really dramatic situation. We've got these two people with these, and so we had people that were very close to me contacting and wanting to be informed on everything that was happening in the journey and things like that. And I had
Wow.
a very good friend tell me, like, you're not obligated. Like, they want that information, but it's not your obligation to keep everyone informed. You don't have to do a blog on the day to day,
Mhm.
the minute by minute happenings of Ryan's recovery or Ryan's journey. And so I let go of the things that didn't serve me by replenishing my energy, and I intentionally invited in the things that did. So, I had conversations with friends who didn't even know what was going on. Like, I'm not big on social media, so I actually like had friends that I would call that had no idea what was happening, and I would give them a little bit of information but say, like, I really just want to talk to you, like, about something
Mm.
that's not this. I walked a lot. A lot of movement was medicine. Like, um, I walked to the hospital. I in both cases I had a space for myself, and I think that would be the advice that I would share with hospitals, to the extent that they can, or just in support of the organizations that do this. The Ronald McDonald houses. There's a place called the
Mhm.
Transplant House in Cleveland that provide studio apartments and even 2-bedroom apartments for families that are waiting or recovering from transplant. In Nashville, we were connected to like corporate housing, which was frankly not as great as the transplant house, but it gave a space to not be in the hospital, not surrounded by everything that's there, but to just sleep, be mindful, refresh, like be, use my own coffee cup.
Yeah.
Like just have a semblance of a home in the midst of being somewhere that is not your home, was really, really important to me personally, because, you know, day to day, home is where I get my energy. I like to
Right.
get my hands in dirt. I like to, you know, shift little pieces of furniture around. I like to water
Mhm.
my plants. I like to pet my dogs. And so, like, having that space for that was really important. And I think there's a lot of organizations that provide it. And I think some, hospitals do a better job than others of doing it.
Yes.
But that was, and luckily I knew immediately that that was a priority. So I prioritize finding those spaces in both of my situations very quickly. Um, but I would advise hospitals and doctors, and it's usually like a social worker at the hospital that connects you, to be really, um, to really guide people very strongly into finding that space, um, that where they can establish a home base that's
Mhm.
not the hospital room.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is absolutely important. And I echo that from my own experience and through the organization that we've had. We've provided that to people, and I know how important that is. But I think it's very interesting and cool that you recognize that about yourself and then sought that out. I don't think a lot of people do that as much. And so I think that's another learning from you today, is that you listened to your intuition or that need that you had, and then you acted on it and said, I need this. I'm going to seek this out and create this for myself so that I can be the person that Ryan needs to be, me to be, that Steve needs to be, that I need to be for myself. And I think that's a very, really insightful thing that you shared that I think a lot of people can learn from. Again, something simple, but I think especially as women, sometimes we don't ask for what we need.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that part of that might have been another residual lesson from going through it with Steve. So the entire time my
Mm.
husband was in the hospital, it was still COVID restrictions. There were no visitors allowed.
That
So
that had to be so
I
hard.
was managing that virtually, but I also recognized the blessing in that, right? So I recognized that I could get on Zoom calls with his doctors, or, be on phone calls and be managing all of that anxiety, but, be at home and taking the comfort from that. So I transferred that lesson, when it was Ryan. And I can't not mention, like you asked about support network, like what my friends provided to me, friends and family, was just supporting that comfort. So, when I was in Cleveland, I received care packages from my lifelong friends here who sent a throw blanket and a pair of slippers and, some tea bags and just things that helped me to create that space. And that was so appreciated and so lovely. And they weren't, if I said to anyone that I talked to, friends or family, like, I just can't talk about this right now. Like, it's changing, things are changing so rapidly. And there's always that period of time where things are just touch and go for a while. And I was like, I can't, I know that you want to know what's going on. I know that you love him too, but
Mhm.
I just can't be your source of information for this right now. Like, here's what I'll give you the synopsis, and then, like, tell me, how the play was last week. Tell me
Yeah.
about what's happening with you. You know, let's talk about your recommendations for a book that I can be reading or something like that. But I need this time to recharge.
Yeah. Wow. That's that you asked for that, and are modeling that for people. And through this conversation, I think is incredible, because I think it's something that is needed in life, just in life in general, but it's needed especially when we're in these challenging times too. So thank you for that. I wanted to ask you a couple more things before we end, and one is about your daughter. I mean, she went through this too, and she's a behind the scenes person who watched her father go through receiving a transplant, and her brother, and you being here, there, and everywhere. Like, I'm not asking you to speak for her because she's her own person, but
Mhm.
how is she doing, and like, just what did you notice in her? I mean, I'm sure an equally amazing young woman.
Yes. Yeah, in all of this, recounting all of this, like this is the part that will probably bring me to tears because I
Mhm.
feel like in all of it, I almost feel like she's carried the heaviest burden of all. Like she watched, you know, 50% of her immediate family go through these
Yes.
incredible journeys, like people that she loves. Um, and because of, when it happened and COVID and, in Cleveland, I was the only one allowed in there was also restrictions there. So I was the only one allowed in the hospital. She had to do it remotely. And her strategy was to just, and supported by all of us, was to try to stay focused on her own things. Like right now, like the best that you can do for me, because she was very much like, what can I do for you, mom? How can I help? And I was like, honestly, just live your life as happily as possible right now. Um, so that I have one less thing to worry about. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want, it's helpful for all of us to know that you're thriving and that you're doing well. Um, and she did that, but while carrying this burden. And obviously, the connection between Ryan and Steve, we determined later that it's a genetic predisposition.
Sure.
And Devin was genetically tested, and she carries the gene. So on top of all of it, she also knows that, this potential is in her genes. Like it's
Mm.
in her genes, and even if it never manifests, and it might not, it's something that she can pass along, and
Wow.
that weighs heavily. And I have so much admiration for the way that she carries that. Um, because she takes, I think she takes the lessons. I think she looks for the positive. Um, but she also, psychologically, I, as a mother, worry a lot more about her having to carry that forward than I think I can't say than I ever was in any of the other journeys, but it's so different. Like the other, watching Ryan go through it, and especially like his approach to it is,
Yeah.
okay, what's the next barrier? Because I'm going to bust through it. Like
Mhm.
that's just his athlete's mindset.
Sure.
And then, with my daughter, I have her carrying this potentiality of a very difficult journey and having to deal with it just purely psychologically. There's nothing she can do to, there's nothing in her control there other than her mindset about it. So I think it poses a really big challenge, but also a challenge that I think equips her incredibly for an exceptional life. Um,
Hmm.
because if she can do it with this situation, I think
She can do with
she can
anything.
conquer anything. Exactly.
Yeah. 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 I always, you know, sometimes for the things that my family's gone through, I feel guilty, that my other kids have to witness things or go
Mhm.
through things, and I have those moments when I just feel bad about it or guilty about it. Moms we want to fix, like you said, you
Yes.
wanted to hold Ryan and just wrap them up, and 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 in my best moments, I realize that these are going to be the things that are going to make them
Yes.
do really exceptional things with their life, and that the world is in desperate need of seeing people to teach them how to do hard things
Yes.
and to grow through them, and then to take those things and to do something with it, which is the whole point of the Heartstrong idea, is like,
Yes.
we need people to lead to model that for us.
Yes.
I think our culture is in desperate need of that. And so it's like, on one hand, you're like, oh God, I don't want my kid to have to be the person to do that. And on the other hand, it's like, how incredible that they are doing it.
Yes. Yes.
You
And
know?
you build an admiration for them too, that it
Yes.
enhances your relationship as a parent. Like
Yeah.
it's beautiful, but it also is hard. It's that dichotomy, like,
It
even when you
is.
reflect on if any adult listening reflects on their own life and thinks about something they are proud of, and they think about what brought them there, it was probably something that was pretty crappy to go through.
Yes.
But
Absolutely.
yet
It's
with
not
our
the easy stuff.
children, like, oh my gosh, like I can remember having little kids, when they were tiny, and I'd get like personally affronted if there was another kid on the playground that didn't want to play with them in the sandbox.
Yes.
And like I didn't want them to have faced that like rejection or pain. But
Mm.
you know, now I can look and say everything hard that happened to me made me better somehow. And I've got to, we've got to look at the bad things that happen, all of this, and say it's preparing them for something
Yeah.
wonderful, something
Something
wonderful.
wonderful is going to happen
That's
someday.
right. That's right.
Right, right. Well, I want to ask you one more thing. So on this season of the podcast, I've asked everyone this question. And so the season I focused on who we become and what we create from the heartaches that we witness in the world around us, and then the adversities that we face. Like, who are we becoming in the process? So my question for you is, what do you really like about yourself, about you, Kelley, because of what you face? Like, what is something that has grown out of it that you're just like, I'm just really proud about this about myself. I really like this about myself.
I It's going to sound really small, especially with like Jessica, your story, I think is so touching, and what you've done with your story, building this platform. It just seems so remarkable, and the influences is vast. And I look at people like you and people who face much like the most tragic of results of this situation. Like I'm lucky. Like we walked a path and it came to a happy ending. It doesn't always happen that way. And people who don't get the happy ending but still build the strength out of it, like I admire it so greatly. And I hope that someday I might do something bigger with my experience. But right now, I have to say that what I like the most about myself, and that what I'm taking away, is just perspective. And again, it's one word and it seems so tiny, but it manifests in every single every single aspect of my life, and in ways that I don't think I can understand, like how those micro choices every day based on the perspective that I gained are going to accumulate into some end result that I think will bring me to some place that is spectacular. Um,
Mm.
but it's just, you know, people go through their entire lives and never get the perspective that it's about how you face every day. It's
Yeah.
not about, getting through it and going to Hawaii for 2 weeks, and then those 2 weeks in Hawaii are epic. It's about, you know, what you're doing later this afternoon, and the relationships that you're building, and the love that you're finding, and finding the beauty and the joy in, a walk around your neighborhood. That
Mm.
is what it's about. Yeah. And I think that there are people who die and never learn that. And so I'm grateful that I have it and that I'm living with it. And I think that I'm making choices based on that every single day, several times a day, that bring good things back into my life.
It's like the ripple effects. When you were talking, all I could think of was just like a little, the ripple effects in water about how and the choices that you're making, the micro choices, are then like influencing the people next to you. And it's just the beautiful ripple effects of Steve and Ryan and Devin and you and your story and the way that you are approaching this world and influencing this world because of just who you are and how you're approaching it, that I think is the most beautiful gift that you're offering. It's really incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelley, for joining me. I love this conversation. And I think that people that hear this podcast are really going to it's like a masterclass in how to live a really beautiful present life. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me here on the Heartstrong podcast. Please rate and review this podcast and share an episode that you love with a friend, because when you do, you help us grow our mission of encouraging people to grow through the challenges of their lives and to live their full potential. We'll see you next time.